Chapter 22. Down to the Silladillan the Mordwraiths came, gliding to the water's edge, almost without seeming to move. Hooded and featureless within the shadow of their cowls, they might have been ghosts of no substance, but for the black clawed fingers slipped from beneath their coverings to wrap with death grips about their three gnarled grey staffs of burnished witchwood. The wail of their known believers rose all about them, shrieking into the whistle of the wind. To those who watched from the battlements of Capel, it seemed as if the Black Ones had been born of its sound. Then, without warning, the terrible wail died into silence, as the gnomes grew suddenly still. The wind's strident shriek sounded across the empty expanse of the Silladillan, and the lapping of the waves stirred with its passing. The foremost of the Mordwraiths lifted his staff high, his skeletal black arm thrusting from his protective robe like blasted deadwood. A strange and vibrant hush fell over the heights, and it seemed to the defenders that for an instant even the wind had gone still. Then the staff came slowly down, reaching toward the blackened waters of the lake. The other staffs joined in, witchwood touching and becoming one as burnished tips slipped within the waters of Silladillan. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the staffs exploded into lances of red fire, the flames ripping downward into the lake, burning and scorching its cool darkness. The waters shuddered and heaved, then began to boil. Gnomes shrieked in a cacophony of glee and fear, stumbling back from the shore's edge. "It is a summons!" Slanter cried. The red fire burned through the murky, impenetrable blackness, down into the deepest recess of the lake, to where no light ever shone. Like a stain of blood, the light of those flames spread outward through the water, reaching geysers of steam burst skyward with a violent hiss, and the whole of the lake began to churn. The defenders on the ramparts of the dwarf fortress stood frozen with indecision. Something was about to happen, something unspeakable, and no one knew how it could be stopped. "We've got to get out of here!" Slant snatched at KRRAAKKEEN urgently. There was fear in his eyes, but reason as well. "Quickly, weapons master!" Abruptly, the fire from which the witchwood staffs died away. The grey wood lifted from the Silladillan, clawed hands drawing back within their robes. Yet still the waters boiled, feverishly. The reddened stain had become a deep and distant glow that shone far from beneath the surface like an eye slipped open from sleep. The wail of the gnome siege army rose once more, shrill and expectant. Hands lifted and joined, stretching as if the staffs of the Mordwraiths signalled anew. Steam ripped from the lake in answer to the wail, and the whole of the Silladillan seemed to erupt with a newfound fury. Then something huge and dark began to rise from the depths. "Weapons master!" Slanter cried out. But KRRAAKKEEN shook his head. "Stand fast! Helt! Bring the longbows!" The borderman disappeared back into the watchtower at once. Ye glanced after him momentarily, then turned back to the Silladillan, back to the deafening wail of the gnomes, and to the black thing rising from the deep. It came swiftly now, growing in size as it neared the surface, an evil summoned by the wraiths. But what manner of thing was it? Ye swallowed hard against the tightening of his throat. Whatever it was monstrous, its bulk seeming to fill the whole of the lake bottom as it lifted free. Slowly it began to take shape, a great and hulking thing with arms that twisted and groped. Then with a thunderous surge it broke the surface of the lake and burst free into the grey dawn. A misshapen black body wrenched clear of the confining waters and hung silhouetted for an instant against the light. Barrel-like in appearance, it was coated with bottom mud and slime, crusted over with sea life and coral. Four great fin legs propelled as it rose, clawed and spiny. Its head was a mass of writhing tentacles that surrounded a giant beak-shaped maw lined with razor teeth. Suckers coated the insides of the tentacles, each the size of a man's spread hand, the whole protected without by scales and spines. Immediately back of the tentacles and to either side a pair of red eyes blinked coldly, stretching as it rose. The thing was more than 100 feet from tip to tail and 40 feet across. Cries of dismay sounded from the battlements of Kapau. "A kraken," KRRAAKKEEN said. "We are done now." The wail of the gnomes had risen to a shriek that forbore all semblance of anything human. Now, with the monster's appearance into the light, the wail dissipated into a battle cry that broke across the length and breadth of Kapau. Down into the waters of the lake the kraken thundered, its black body twisting in response as it turned abruptly toward the wall of the dam and the fortress that protected it. "It comes for us," KRRAAKKEEN whispered in surprise. "A thing that cannot live within fresh water, a thing that comes from the ocean, yet here, brought by the dark magic." The grey eyes glittered coldly. "But it shall not have us, I think." "Helped?" Instantly the giant borderman was at his side. 3 longbows clasped in one great hand. KRRAAKKEEN took one, left one with the borderman, and passed the third to Edain at Lessadale. Slanter pushed forward. "Listen to me. You cannot stand against this thing. It is a monster summoned out of evil, and too much, even for you." But KRRAAKKEEN did not seem to hear him. "Remain with the Veilman, gnome. He is your charge now. See that he stays safe." He went down off the watchtower, Hilton Edain Lessadale close upon his heels. KRRAAKKEEN hesitated only an instant, a mistrustful glance directed at Slanter. Then he, too, followed. The kraken surged up against the wall of the dwarf citadel, its giant bulk hammering into stone and mortar with stunning force as it breached. The giant tentacles swept from the water, reaching for the dwarfs that clustered on the battlemounts. Dozens were caught up, knocked from their feet into the waters of the lake, and wrapped in the suckers and spines of the thing that attacked them. Shrieks and howls filled the morning air as the dwarfs died. Weapons rained down upon the black thing, but its hide protected it from harm. Steadily it cleared away the small figures who sought to hold it back, tearing at them with its whip-like arms, breaking apart the battlemounts behind which they sought to keep safe. Now the gnomes joined in the attack as well, the siege army battering the gates at both ends of the high dam, scaling ladders and grappling hooks, clutched in their hands as they came. Dwarf defenders rushed to the parapets, holding fast against this fresh assault, but the gnomes seemed to have gone mad. Heedless of the losses being inflicted upon them, they flung themselves against the gates and walls to die. Yet there was purpose to this seeming madness. While the dwarf defenders were thus distracted, the kraken worked its way north until it was up against the wall, where it banked closest to the gates. With a sudden lurch it rose from the waters of the lake. Thin legs braced upon the stone of the dam where it curved into the shoreline. Massive tentacles snapped forward along the walls. Suckers fastened to the gates, and the monster heaved back. With a splintering of wood and iron, crossbars snapped and locks broke apart. The gates of the citadel tumbled down, ripped from their hinges, and the army of the gnomes poured through with a roar of triumph. On the battlements of the watchtower, Yer and Slanter viewed the struggle with growing horror. With the gates gone, the dwarves could no longer hold back their attackers. In a matter of minutes, the fortress would be overrun. Already its defenders were in retreat along the walls leading back, small clusters rallying about their captain, desperately trying to stand against the onslaught. But it was clear from where the Valman and the gnomes stood watching that the battle was lost. "We've got to escape while we can, boy," Slanter insisted, a hand gripping the other's arm. But Yer refused to leave. still searching for his friends, almost too horrified by what was happening to do anything else. The Kraken had slipped once more into the waters of the lake, dragging its bulk back along the sea wall toward the centre of the dam. In its wake, the moored wraiths glided to the edge of the shattered battlemount, grey staffs raised in exultation as their gnome followers surged forward. With implacable purpose, the gnomes moved into the fortress of the dwarves. Slanter! Yer cried suddenly, pointing into the heart of the battle. High atop the ramparts of the forward wall, Hell's giant form rose up through the smoke and dust. Elb Foraker at his side, bow gripped tightly in one hand. The borderman braced himself against the parapet, sighted downward to where the moored wraith stood, slowly drew back the bowstring and let it slip free. A shadowy burr, the long black arrow sped away to bury itself deep into the breast of the foremost wraith. The creature, the creature straightened with a shudder, hammered back by the force of the blow. A second arrow followed close upon the first, and again the wraith staggered back. Shrieks of dismay rose up from those close to the black things, and for an instant the whole of the gnome advance seemed to falter. But then the moored wraith steadied, one hand clawed, grasped the arrows embedded within it, and drew them free with effortless ease. Holding them high for all to see, the monster crushed them into splinters. Then the staff of the witchwood lifted and red fire burst from its tip. All along the battlements of the fire burned, exploding into stone and defender alike. Helton Foraker flew back as fire reached them and disappeared in an avalanche of broken wall and dust. Yer started forward, but Slanter yanked him about. You can't do anything to help them, boy. Without waiting for any argument on the matter, he began dragging Yer along the ramparts toward the stone stairway leading down. Better start worrying about yourself. Perhaps if we were quick enough. Then they caught sight of the Kraken. It had lifted itself out of the Silladillin, midway along the sea wall where the broad courtyard joined together the fortress that guarded the ends of the high dam. Its tentacles and thin legs gripping at the stone. Once clear, with only the hindmost portion of its barreled body still submerged within the lake, it pivoted slowly to where the dwarf defenders were attempting to escape the North Fortress. Tentacles stretched across the girth of the high dam in a writhing mass. In seconds, all passage was blocked. Slanter! Yer cried out in warning, falling back against the stairs as one giant feeler swept past his head. They retreated back up the stairway, crouching down within the shelter of the balustrade, where it curved back into the parapet. Spray from the monster's tail fin that thrashed within the lake mixed with the dust and shattered stone to rain down about them. Below, the Kraken's tentacles groped and hammered about the fortress walls, clutching at anything that ventured within reach. It seemed for a moment as if any chance of escape back across the courtyard had been lost. But then the dwarves counterattacked. They rushed from the lower levels of the fortress, the darkened stairwells and the tunnels that ran beneath. Foremost among them was the dwarf commander Radum, red hair flying. He led his soldiers into the tangle of giant arms, cutting and hacking with a broadaxe. Bits and pieces of the Kraken flew in a trough of blood, reddish ichor spilling down upon the dampened stone of the dam. But the Kraken was a monstrous thing, and the dwarves were little more than gnats to be brushed aside. The tentacles came down, smashing the tiny creatures who swarmed about it, leaving them lifeless. Still, the defenders came on, determined to clear the way for those trapped within the doomed fortress. But the Kraken swept them aside as quickly as they appeared, and they fell dying all about the monster. Finally, the Kraken caught Radum as the dwarf commander fought to break past. The monster swung the red-haired dwarf high into the air. Unaffected by the broadaxe that still flailed in stubborn determination, the Kraken lifted Radum. Then, with horrifying suddenness, it smashed him downward to the stone, broken, twisted, and lifeless. Slanter was pulling vainly at Yer, "Run!" he screamed in desperation. Tentacles swept past him, hammering into the battlements and smashing the stone so that it flew in all directions. A shower of jagged fragments struck the Valman and the gnome as they struggled, knocking them, sprawling them, half burying them in the debris. Shaking his head dazedly, regained his feet and staggered forward against the stone balustrade. Below, the dwarves had fallen back within the besieged fortress, demoralized by the loss of Radham. The Kraken was still stretched across the littered courtyard, edging closer now to the walls upon which Yer crouched. The Valman started to drop back, then stopped in dismay. Slanter lay stunned at his feet, blood oozing from a deep cut in his head. Then far below, seemingly from out of nowhere, KRRAAKKEEN appeared. Lean and black against the grey light of the dawn, he darted swiftly from the shelter of the battlements on the sea wall, a short spear gripped in his hand. Yer cried out as he saw him, a sudden wild cry, but the sound was lost in the wail of the wind and the screams of battle. Across the blood-soaked length of the high dam, the weapons master raced, a small and agile figure, not away from the deadly tentacles of the Kraken, but directly into them. Weaving and dodging like a shadow without substance, he broke from the monster's gaping maw. The tentacles hammered down, swatting at him, missing him, sliding past him. Far too slow for anyone so impossibly quick. But one slip, one mistake. Up against the hooked beak, the weapons master leaped against the very jaws of the beast. He struck with stunning swiftness, the short spear burying itself deep within the soft tissue of the open maw. Instantly the tentacles collapsed, the giant body lurching. But KRRAAKKEEN was already moving, spinning sideways and diving clear of the trap that sought to snare him. On his feet once more, the weapons master caught up a new weapon. This one, a lance fixed with an iron pipe, the haft still clutched in the lifeless hands of its owner. With a quick scooping motion, KRRAAKKEEN had wrenched it free. Too late. The Kraken caught sight of him once more, of this dangerous attacker. Barely 2 yards from one lidded eye, the iron-gripped lance thrust upward at the unprotected eye, piercing through skin, blood and bone, and into the brain beyond. The stricken Kraken wrenched backward in obvious distress, thin legs churning madly. Stone ramparts shattered all about as it sought to regain the waters of the Silladillan. Still, KRRAAKKEEN clung to the lance embedded within the monster's brain, refusing to release it, grinding it deeper and deeper as it waited for the life force to expend itself. But the Kraken was impossibly strong. Heaving upward, it lifted free of the high dam, then fell ponderously into the Silladillan and dove from sight. Hands still fixed upon the haft of the lance, KRRAAKKEEN was carried with it. Yer stumbled back against the shattered balustrade in stunned disbelief, his cry of anger dying soundlessly in his throat. Below the high dam lay clear again, and the dwarf defenders, trapped within, broke from their prison to the safety of the South Watch. Then Slanter was next to him once more, staggering back to his feet. Blood covered the wizened yellow face, but the gnome brushed it aside wordlessly and yanked the Valman down the stairs after him, stumbling and falling. They gained the courtyard and started across in the direction taken by the fleeing dwarf. But already they were too late. Gnome hundreds had appeared, screaming, a mass of armoured, blood-soaked forms. They poured across the crest of the high dam and streamed down into the court. Lanta took one quick look back and abruptly wheeled, into one of the dark stairwells. They raced down several flights of lamp-lighted stairs, deep into the shadowed dark of the lower levels that led to the inner workings of the locks. Above, the sounds of pursuit began to fade. When the stairs ended, they found themselves in a dimly littered corridor that disappeared down the length of the dam. Slanter hesitated, then turned north, pulling Yer after him. "Slanter!" the Valman howled, struggling to slow the gnome. "This leads back the way we've come, away from the dwarves." "Gnomes will be going the other way too," Slanter snapped. Won't be hunting dwarves or anybody else this way, will they? Now run!" They ran into the gloom, stumbling wearily along the empty corridor. The sounds of battle were far away now, distant and faint against the steady grinding of the machinery and the low rush of the waters of the Silladillan. His mind spun with the shock of what had befallen them. The little company from Coalhaven was no more. Helt and Fouracre struck down by the walkers, KRRAAKKEEN carried away by the Kraken, and Edane and Lissadell disappeared. Only Slanter and he were left, and they were running for their lives. Kapow was gone, fallen to the gnomes. The locks and dams that regulated the flow of the Silver River west into the homeland of the dwarves were in the hands of their most implacable enemy. Everything was lost. His lungs tightened with the strain of running, and his breathing was harsh and laboured in his ears. Tears stung his eyes, and his mouth was dry with bitterness and anger. What was he to do now? How was he to reach Bryn? He could never find her before she stepped down into the Malmore and was forever lost. How was he to complete the mission given him by the king? His legs went out from under him, knocked away by something he hadn't seen, and he went sprawling into the darkness. Ahead, Slanter ran on, unheeding a dim shadow in the darkness of the tunnel. Hurriedly, Year scrambled back to his feet. Slanter was getting too far ahead of him. Then an arm shot out of the darkness, and a hand clamped across his mouth, rough and scaled, sealing away his breath. A second arm encircled his body, hard as iron, and he was dragged back into the shadows of an open door. "Stay, little peoples," a voice hissed. "Friends, we are magic friends." Year's voice was soundless. A scream in his mind. It was mid-morning when Slanter pulled himself clear of the dwarf escape tunnel, exiting through a thick mass of shrub that concealed the hidden entrance, there to stand alone upon the windswept heights of the mountains north of Kapow. Grey, hazy light filtered down out of the skies, clouded and drenched by rain, and the chill of the night still lingered in the mountain rock. The gnome glanced about cautiously, then he hunched down against a shrub and moved forward to where the slope dropped away into the gorge. Far below, the locks and dams of Kapow were swarming with gnomes, all across the broad bands of stone block, about the battlements and ramparts of the fortress. Deep within the inner workings of the complex, the gnome hunters scurried like ants about the business of maintaining their hill. Well, this was the way it had to end, Slanter thought. He shook his rough yellow face in silent admonition. No one could stand against the walkers. Kapow was theirs now. The siege was done. He stood up slowly, eyes still fixed on the scene below. There was little danger of being discovered this high up. The gnomes were all within the fortress, and what remained of the dwarf army had fled south to Coalhaven. Nothing was left for him to do but to go his own way. And that, of course, was exactly what he had wanted all along. Yet he stood there, his mind adrift with unanswered questions. He still did not know what had become of Yelmsford. 1 minute the Velman had been right behind him. The next he had vanished just like that. Slanter had looked for him, of course. There hadn't been a trace. So at last the gnome had gone on alone, because after all, what else could he do? Boy was too much trouble anyway, he muttered irritably, but his words lacked conviction somehow. He sighed, glanced upward into the greying skies, and turned slowly away. With the Velman gone and the rest of the little company dead or scattered, the journey to Heaven's Well was finished. Just as well, of course. It was a stupid, impossible quest from the beginning. He had told them so time and again. All of them. They had no idea what they were up against. They had no idea of the power of the walkers. It wasn't his fault that they had failed. The frown on his rough face deepened. Nevertheless, he didn't like not knowing what had happened to the boy. He slept back past the shrub guarding the hidden entrance to the tunnel and climbed to a rocky projection overlooking the eastland and giving view to its sweep west. At least he had been smart enough to plan his own escape, he thought smugly. That was because he was a survivor, and survivors always took time to plan for an escape. Except for the crazed ones, like KRRAAKKEEN. Clancy's frown turned to a faint smile. He had learned long ago not to risk himself unnecessarily where there was no reason for it. He had learned long ago to keep one eye open for the quickest way out of any place into which he ventured. So when the dwarf had been kind enough to provide him with maps showing the underground tunnels that would take them north, behind the siege army, he had been quick to study them. That was why he was alive and safely out of there. If the rest of them hadn't been so foolish. The wind blew against his face, harsh and bitter as it came out of the mountain rock. Far north and west, the forests of the Shannara spread away into patches of autumn colour, dampened by mist and rain. That was the way for him, he thought grimly, back to the borderlands, to some semblance of sanity and peace, where his old life could be regained and all of this forgotten. He was free again, and he could go now where he wished. A week, 10 days at the outside, in the Eastland, and the war that ravaged it would be left behind. He scuffed his boot against the rock. That boy had sand, he said quietly, his thoughts straying yet. Undecided, he stared out into the rain.